This is the first public meeting or virtual community information meeting for the City of London's new zoning bylaw, ReThink Zoning. This meeting is being recorded and the presentation portion will be posted online following the meeting on Get Involved London. If you need to join by phone, there is a phone number at the top right of the screen. If you're having technical issues with your audio, I see people arriving, but I think we should get started. So Justin, I'd like to pass it to you.
Thanks, Liz. My name is Justin Adama. I'm the manager of long range planning here for the City of London, and thanks everyone for joining us this evening. So just before we get started, I was thinking back to when I first joined the City of London. As I was sort of preparing and thinking about this meeting, I joined the city and I actually moved to London in 2014. That was a pretty exciting time to be a Londoner and to be working in the planning department, because we were in the middle of an exercise that we called ReThink London. And that was the process that we used to prepare the London plan. And really the type of questions and the conversations we were having at that time were, what kind of city do we want London to be, and how can London grow in a way that achieves a pretty broad vision for our city. We're now working on a zoning bylaw. Now that the London plan's been approved, we're working on a zoning bylaw that will be used as really the primary tool to achieve that vision. And so we've called this process ReThink Zoning, and there's a couple of reasons for that, but one of the main ones is to connect this zoning bylaw process back to the London plan and that ReThink London exercise that we went through. Just like ReThink London was the process to prepare an official plan that included a vision for London, so ReThink Zoning is a process to create one of the key tools that we'll have in order to achieve that vision. So this is a great opportunity to participate in a conversation that will really help to achieve the vision that was created through the London plan. So I just want to say thank you all for being here and for participating in that conversation. And before I hand it over to our consultant team, who's going to lead us through the majority of the meeting tonight, I just want to acknowledge the land where the City of London is found. So the City of London is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, and the Attawandaron people. We honor and respect the history, languages, and culture of the diverse Indigenous people who call this territory home. The City of London is currently home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people today. As representatives of the people of the City of London, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory.
Thanks, Justin. So just before we get started, a couple housekeeping measures. So we're on a Zoom webinar this evening. So a couple things that are useful for you to know if you've never been on a Zoom webinar before. We'll be using the Q&A function in this meeting to gather questions. So what you can do is you can see at the bottom on the toolbar, there's a little Q&A button. You can click or tap that button and it'll allow you to write a question, which we'll get to after the presentation. Additionally, there's a button that allows to show captions. So this will auto-generate captions for the meeting. Just to help you along the way. So this is, we'll put this up towards the end again, but just a reminder, this is what the Q&A module will look like, and you can use it to type in questions. You'll be able to see the questions of others who have joined the meeting this evening, and you can upvote questions that you are questions that you like, or like a similar question that you also have. We'll also be using a tool called Mentimeter this evening, and we'll have some more information on that when we get to the first poll, which is just coming up. But you can go visit www.menti.com and input the code 4693 374 to join the Menti poll. So we're actually going to start off just with a little test run of that before we get to the meeting. So I'm gonna switch us over to our first Menti poll. Give folks a couple seconds here. Put it in the chat as well. You can select the www.menti.com and then input the code 4693374. I see a couple people giving hearts, so it looks like some people have started to get it, so that's great. And we will move us to our first poll of the evening, which is a nice one just to get us started. And we're just asking, we want to know, how long have you lived in London? We've got a whole bunch of different options that you should see pop up on your screen. You can see some folks that have started. We've got a good range of people. Lots of people in the kind of 6 to 10 year range, and a bunch of people in the more than 20 years. So that's really exciting. We've got some longtime Londoners joining us this evening, as well as some folks who are newer to the city. Great. I'll just move to our next question, which is, did you participate in ReThink London? So this is what Justin was talking about earlier, the London plan, which kind of is the document that comes as part of the beginning of how we figure out what this zoning bylaw looks like. So we've got a pretty much 50-50 split on that, which is good. Some folks have been with part of those discussions already. And I'll just move us to our last question. Ooh, we've got a couple people trickling in. Great participation here. We've got 26 people weighing in, which is awesome. 27 now. And so our last question before we start to get into the presentation is, what do you think about when you hear about zoning? So this is a question where you can just type in kind of the first thought that comes to your mind when you're thinking about zoning. So one comment around restrictive, community planning, complication, regulations. Wait for a couple more, scroll through them. What a neighborhood looks like. Again, some more uncomplicated. What can go where? Some more on restrictiveness. So that's great. With that, I'll just move us back to the presentation and hand it back to you, Liz.
Thanks so much, Alex. Thanks again for joining, everyone. My name is Liz, and I'm with a firm called Lura Consulting. With me, who you just met, was Alexander and Cyan, and we are an independent third-party facilitation team that's working with the city and the consultants on the public engagement for this project. And we're also here to facilitate this evening's meeting, as well as write a report. As I said in the beginning, tonight's presentation is being recorded and will be published on the City of London's Get Involved webpage. So we will put that in the chat so you can access it. I can see I think over 40 people have joined us now. We actually had over 100 people register, and we're so happy that you're all here. This is the first public meeting on ReThink Zoning, and we wanted to make sure we could have as many people join as possible. And of course, we'd love to meet in person, but we decided to have this meeting virtual this evening. So the first thing I'm going to do is walk you through the agenda and explain sort of why we're here, the purpose, give you a little bit of an overview of the project itself, and then offer an opportunity for the consulting team to give you a presentation. So as I mentioned, it is our first meeting, and we really want to share information about this project with you and hear some of your questions that you might have about it. So we're going to explore why zoning matters, the process, as well as the approach to the project, including what we have heard to date, some areas of influence that we want to get some ideas and input on, which is around the climate emergency, as well as housing affordability, offer you an opportunity to ask questions and share more about how to get involved and how to participate. So one of the things that you'll notice, and I saw it in your comments, in some of your comments, is that zoning and the conversation around zoning for a city can actually be pretty complicated. So the team got together and we thought it might be a good idea, or would be a good idea, to have a meeting to share, what zoning is, what it's all about, and how the city is thinking about in terms of developing the draft zoning bylaw. So this isn't presenting the draft zoning bylaw to you. This is more of a pre-meeting to share about the project, the process, and how you can get involved. So there may be some terms that you understand, and there may be some terms that you don't. We will work our best to make sure we explain those terms. And if we haven't explained something, you can ask us what it means, because we want to make sure we provide that information to you, because we do know it can be complicated. And you have said that in your responses thus far. So it is the first meeting. There'll be lots more time for engagement along the way. Once we get through the presentation, we will have some time for questions. So we will explain to you again how to do that once we get through the presentation. We also have a comment form that will be open until January 3rd, and we'll share that link here in case you have more questions or comments. So we talked a little bit about the London Plan and Rethink London. This meeting is not about the London Plan. It's not about provincial policies like Bill 23 or zoning applications in development that are under review for specific sites in the city. We will be exploring why zoning matters. We will talk about the process and approach, including what we've heard, get some input on climate emergency and housing affordability, and offer you an opportunity to ask us questions. So thank you again for joining. I'll just share a little bit about the process and where we're at. So next slide, please. So you'll see here, project initiation, then the team worked in terms of background review and development of discussion papers. So you'll hear a little bit about that in terms of where the team has been, as well as some sample zones and what they've been looking at. Then next year, the team will be moving into drafting the zoning bylaw, and you'll hear a little bit about how that's going to happen. So there'll be an opportunity to take a look at that and provide input once the team is in that stage. Then there'll be a second draft of the zoning bylaw, and then the final. So that at a high level is the project overview, and you'll hear about more of it in a moment. So there has been some engagement to date, and tonight you'll actually meet more members from the City of London, Sajaki Planning, as well as hear from the Lura team, who's going to work to get your questions answered. But we've done the city, and we've done some pop-up booths like Gathering on the Green and Sunfest. They've been having one-on-one meetings to get input. We've established a stakeholder working group, and we've had 2 meetings thus far. There's been attendance of the Climate Emergency Action Plan open house. There are online tools. We'll share the project website with you. There's also some videos, some key documents, and there's a survey, and we'll also have the comment form tonight. And there's ongoing staff engagement. So that's what we've done so far. But of course, these initiatives will continue, and we will have more opportunities for meetings like this as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so with that, enough from us. Let's get started with David from Sajaki Planning.
Great, thank you very much, Liz. And as Liz just mentioned, my name is David Sajaki from Sajaki Planning. We are the lead consultant on ReThink Zoning, working very closely with Ari Millward and Associates Limited, Lura, who you met, Liz and Alex, as well as Friedman Urban Solutions, Scribe Communications, and Posad Maxwan. I'm going to speak a bit to why ReThink Zoning and how zoning bylaws work. One of the things, I'll just repeat what Liz had mentioned too, that there are likely to be some new or unfamiliar terms in this presentation. We'll do our best to explain them as we're going through the presentation. And there are specific words that we'll be looking to emphasize or explain further. So those words have been bolded and they'll come up a few times throughout the presentation. So why rethink zoning? Well, zoning bylaws implement cities' official plans. As Justin mentioned, ReThink London, which was the process that led to the London plan, the city's official plan was adopted by council in 2016. However, the existing zoning bylaw that London has right now was approved in 1993, and it implements the 1989 official plan. A lot can change in 30 years. And so what we value and where and how we grow changes significantly over time. And so with great growth comes great responsibility, which is to requote a Stan Lee quotation. But if we go to the next slide, we can illustrate just what some of that growth has been over the past 40 years in London. So the first image is London in 1984, and at the end it's London in 2022. So what we want to understand through the policies of the London plan is how we can create a zoning bylaw that implements those policies to direct where and how growth will occur over time and what it should look like based on how our values and our principles of what we think is important has changed over time as well. So speaking to the London plan on the next slide, please. The London plan is the policy framework for all of London. It directs growth to 2035. There are a few really key directions that are new to the London plan that change from the 1989 plan. So it directs growth inward and upward. It takes a real focus on the idea of place types, and there are 17 place types throughout the city that are either citywide, urban, or rural. Those replace traditional land uses. So it recognizes these places as distinct yet connected places, and it really puts more of a focus not just on use, which is a traditional way of developing official plans, but also on intensity and form. So I'll get into that more, but intensity means how much can be built, form means the shape that buildings can take, and use means what can occur within specific buildings. And so as I mentioned, the ReThink Zoning, or comes out of ReThink Zoning, the new zoning bylaw needs to implement the London plan, and it will replace zoning bylaw Z1. So next slide, please. And this slide just talks about where the project fits within the overall planning framework. So at the very top of planning within the province of Ontario is the Planning Act. So this is provincial legislation that sets out the ground rules for land use planning in Ontario. It describes how land uses may be controlled and who may control them. What it does, it provides direction to set policy as well as the ground rules to implement that policy at a provincial level. Then the provincial policy statement, so the sort of the next level down, it works to set provincial land use policies. So that is high level direction on where and how municipalities should grow. And then municipalities such as London, they implement those provincial policies through municipal official plans. In the case of London, that would be the London plan. And then as mentioned, the zoning bylaw is really critical because that develops regulations based on those policies to implement the specifics of how and where growth can occur. So next slide, please. So zoning bylaws are legal documents. They must meet all of the legislative requirements under the Planning Act. Effectively what they are, they're rule books, and they inform day-to-day planning decisions on the type of development that can take place and where it can be located. Our previous zoning bylaw was very much focused on use. And one of the implications of that is that it resulted in many neighborhoods being divided into discrete areas and separate uses, making it more challenging within specific areas of the city to live within what we consider a complete community, where you can access sort of all of your needs, regardless of your age within your specific neighborhood. So the new zoning bylaw is looking to bring forward a more balanced approach to intensity, use, and form. Zoning regulates things such as building heights and where buildings can be located within a property. So those are really critical, but there is very much a philosophical component to them as well. So we had a meeting this afternoon where we were discussing one of the policies of the London plan. And that policy, I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly, but it says something along the lines of new development is to be compatible with the character of existing neighborhoods. So one of the questions we have to ask ourselves in terms of how do we regulate this through intensity, use, and form is what does compatibility mean? So we're thinking about what does compatibility mean? And then how can we think about what are the specific regulations that come out of that to inform development that we see on the ground? So as I mentioned, the best way to think about this, that we can think of anyhow, is through use, intensity, and form. So next slide, please, Alex. So use is really around what is the major purpose of the building. Residential is a common use. Intensity is around the scale of the building or how much of an activity is permitted within it. And then form, again, is really about defining what is the shape of that building. So those are the three pillars that we're basing, along with place types, that we're basing much of our analysis of how zoning bylaws should develop and can function to implement the policies of the London Plan. So next slide, please. So what does ReThink Zoning aim to achieve? Well, first and foremost, we're looking to achieve the objectives and policies in the London Plan to implement the policies of the London Plan. We're also looking at that in a very specific way to take a contextual place-based approach. As we move forward, we understand that there are two critical challenges that we face that are described in the London Plan, and those are around climate resiliency and housing affordability. So really looking at how can we apply a lens against all of the regulations, and the regulations mean the standards that we're developing to implement that zoning. We are hoping, and we'll do our best, and we're looking for input from everybody to apply a very plain language approach to make the layout and design and the functionality of the zoning bylaw much more intuitive. And we saw the comments around what zoning is earlier in the presentation when the question came up. And what we're really looking for it to do as well is find that right balance between flexibility and certainty. So you know what you can build, where you can build, but it's not overly prescribed. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mishi McCloskey.
Thanks, David. I'm Mishi McCloskey from Sajecki Planning. I'm going to dive into the approach and key findings. So we're going to really look at, a few key highlights, from our initial steps in the process and the background work to date. Next slide, please. So in early summer of this year, 7 discussion papers were prepared with the purpose of exploring important topics in zoning. And we really took a deep dive into the London Plan policies in these key areas, along with some of the other important city plans and strategies. And with this, we conducted, we also conducted a best practice review, including looking to other modern zoning bylaws from both Ontario municipalities and, quite frankly, municipalities across Canada, to really look at, how they approach zoning with a fresh take. We also found ways to work with we looked at ways to approach different zoning issues and challenges experienced in London, and really help those inform our next steps. Next slide, please. So as David mentioned, we would now like to dive into 2 particular areas of interest that we're exploring in the new zoning bylaw. The first being the climate emergency. Next slide, please. So the first step in exploring this topic was to conduct a background review on the climate emergency. And there are many layers to help that helped inform this paper, including the obvious one being the London Plan, in addition to the city's draft climate emergency action plan, as well as conservation authority regulations and other municipal plans and strategies. And within this paper, we really explored what are some of the greatest climate challenges facing London. How does the London Plan specifically address climate change, or speak to it rather? Quote unquote, London has a goal of becoming one of the greenest cities in Canada. And we really asked ourselves, how can zoning help mitigate and adapt to, and help London mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change in the future? Next slide, please. This is a question for the audience. So if you could please turn to your Mentimeter. And we're really looking here for ideas about when you think of climate resiliency, what words come to mind? Please try and keep it, 1 or 2 words max. We'd love to see a brainstorm of what you guys all think. Again, just a reminder, the Mentimeter website and code are at the top of the screen. Give everyone some time to think about it. Perhaps sign back into Menti. Aha, we have one, thank you. And you can think about these in the context of your own neighborhood, you know, the places you like to go in the city. Excellent, great, we're getting some ideas.
Everything's moving around a lot, but
yeah.
Some great ideas around kind of densification of housing, considerations around energy and adaptive reuse, green space and rain gardens, food security and heat islands.
Wonderful. Okay, Alex, I'll leave it to you to call the timing on it.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll move us back and I'll let you keep going, Mishi.
Okay, great. So just looking, oh, actually, if we could go back just to that result, if that's possible, Alex, maybe not, maybe we passed it, but we did see a lot of, okay, so as Alex mentioned, solar, walkability, global warming. So, you know, I think the point here is that we need to sort of review or see climate resiliency through a holistic lens. And really, if we go to the next slide, thank you all for that amazing feedback. But you know, here is a list of different zoning regulations that can help contribute towards sustainable development. And really, you know, some of these terms you've already mentioned in the brainstorm, but you know, from a landscaping perspective, supporting the city's tree canopy and helping, you know, provide regulations that support stormwater management on site, or making sites more green and supporting local diversity. Another way to do that would be community gardens. So again, you guys, you know, identified a lot of those in the brainstorm. So thank you for that. But maybe we'll move to the next slide, which shows a diagram created by one of our partners on the project, Posed Maxwan, and they're out of the Netherlands. And they put this diagram together, just showing really how to achieve sustainable development in the neighborhoods in London in different ways. You know, you can go about this, whether it be allowing for small scale renewable energy systems, or promoting more efficient use of land through infill development. So really, this diagram shows us it's not really about one particular zoning requirement or regulation, but really how all the different requirements work together to achieve a greater resiliency goal. Next slide, please, Alex. So as Liz mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we have done a bit of preliminary engagement on the project. And if you refer to the top right-hand corner, you can see, you know, where we obtained this information. But, you know, these were some things we heard that related to climate resiliency, either through pop-up events or through one-on-one conversations with different Londoners. Next slide, please. And we also issued a survey in the fall. And one of the questions was asking, you know, what do you like about your neighborhood? And, you know, naturally, some of these things that popped up, walkability, bike parking, trees, those all contribute to climate resiliency and you know, healthy neighborhoods. So, you know, at this stage, we're just, you know, drawing connections, understanding that, you know, to David's point earlier, like seeing it through the lens of climate resiliency, seeing zoning through the lens of seeing climate resiliency through the lens of zoning actually provides a really interesting perspective and gets us thinking about, okay, can we regulate these things or shouldn't we? Do they, you know, find them play their spaces in standards instead? So it's something we're continually chatting with the city about. The second area of influence is housing affordability. And moving on to the next slide. So the big question here is, how will we ensure that housing is affordable for all Londoners? And that is actually a policy in the London plan. And broadly speaking, in the City of London, there is an affordable housing community improvement plan, and sort of these three pillars or three tests, what we'll call them, of whether a household is meeting their housing needs and, you know, their core housing needs. And if a situation does not meet these three pillars or these three tests, is considered, you know, to not be meeting that core housing needs. So, If we can keep going through to the next slide. On the topic of affordability, would like you now to brainstorm some types of housing that come to mind when you think of the term affordability. So we're going to launch the Mentimeter again. And again, that question repeated is, when you think of affordability, what types of housing come to mind? Give everyone a bit of time to gather themselves.
Thanks, Mishi. And could I just ask, I just saw in the Q&A just a comment from one of the participants, if we can all the presenters can just slow down their speech a little bit, it'll help with making the captions a bit more accurate.
Always a good reminder. Thank you, Alex. Excellent. Alex, do you mind reading a few of those off the chart as they pop up?
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
So seeing a variety of different housing types coming up here, apartments, so I'm just watching it as it moves around, townhomes, mid-rise, supportive housing, multi-generational housing, granny suites, all different types of housing along the housing continuum, which once we'll just give it a minute or two more, and then I'll hand it back over to you, Mishi.
Excellent.
Yeah, great to see this wide variety of housing types being shared here. All right, I'll send it back to you, Mishi.
Thank you. All right, so we can move on to the next slide, please. So thank you everyone for sharing your responses. So, just looking at this list here, again, similar to the climate resiliency section, we're looking at, where are there opportunities in zoning to help achieve these broader goals that the city has citywide. So if you look to the diagram on the right side of the screen, it actually shows, aside from the additional residential units, which is the top right-hand corner, aside from that, it shows generally, what, the number, how unit size can change, or sorry, unit number can change within the same building envelope. And it really makes us imagine, seeing a single detached home or structure, how can we, how can we think about, using the same building, but repurposing it for more units and allowing for more housing options for Londoners in the future. Next slide, please. And the last portion of this section is a very brief overview of the sample zones. There's a lot we could get into in this section, but for the purpose of, I guess, just time's sake at this stage, we're going to be focusing on the neighborhoods sample zone in particular. So if we can move ahead to the next slide. So there was three, just to sort of, I guess, back it up one step, there were three place type sample zones. And the goal here was to look at London Plan policy and start turning that policy into regulation and assigning, metrics to that regulation. So how much or how little, do we want to see these regulations really take form in the zoning bylaw? The triangle on the left shows, it's just a conceptual diagram, something that we use to sort of, place the place types on based on the three main characteristics of form, intensity, and use. And, looking at the neighborhoods, and initially we thought, okay, this is more of a form-based exercise, but as you can see, compared to the other ones, it actually falls more right in the middle of all three. So it's something that, we're exploring depending on what neighborhood we're in, depending on how close that neighborhood is to, say, a main street. There's many different factors that can influence, what types of regulations are appropriate for that particular zone and parent place type. So if we can go to the next slide, please. As mentioned, we are going to take a brief look at the neighborhood's place type sample zone. And London's neighborhoods are made up of diverse neighborhoods that are both urban and suburban in nature. And as David mentioned earlier, the previous or the existing zoning bylaw, Z-1, was mostly focused on use, which resulted in many neighborhoods being divided by distinct and separated uses. And
Mishi, we just have another request in here to just slow down a little bit? Okay. I
Sure
think it's
thing.
on the screen readers as well. So just to be mindful of that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Liz. So the London Plan envisions these neighborhoods as vibrant and exciting places that also include a diverse mix of housing and businesses to meet the neighborhoods, the needs of neighborhoods residents. So our early thinking, as mentioned, was that these would fall more on the side of form. But as you can see, it ends up, depending on what neighborhood we're looking at, this area can change on the triangle. So let's move forward and explore some of the priorities for the neighborhoods. So we took three principles, or we looked at three different principles to help guide our approach to the neighborhood place type sample zone. And this was based on the London Plan policy. The first being variety. So we wanted to allow for a variety of housing forms. Some examples would be semi-detached homes, townhomes, triplexes, and a variety of intensities. Second, the opportunity for change. So to make more efficient use of space or buildings. And that could be done through things like infill development or allowing or encouraging for new housing forms in existing communities. Last, we looked at context and compatibility. And, again, as David mentioned earlier, this is something we're exploring more with city staff, and it's really important to analyze like what's on the ground today and the change envisioned for the future, and ensuring that change is done in a respectful way that still supports the overarching neighborhood place type policies in the London Plan. Next slide, please. This here is a map from the London Plan, and it's about the street. It's map 3, which is in regards to the street classifications in London. So you can see a legend just on the right-hand side of the screen. And the street classes, or the way that the City of London classifies its streets, plays a key role in determining, what is allowed, what is permitted on those streets and on those properties. So street classes determine things like what heights they want that are permitted along certain streets. For instance, higher order streets or intersections might allow for higher density uses. And they may have a different look or feel than, say, a neighborhood connector street. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Alex. When we ended up mapping this out, one of the goals of this exercise was to simplify and streamline regulations. And the existing Z-1 zoning bylaw, overall across citywide, it has a total of 46 different land use zones and 169 zone variations. So, when we zoom into this sample area, obviously, it's not going to have that many zones, but we really wanted to take a look. Okay, what can we perhaps create ranges, and really, when we took a deeper dive, we noticed that there were some very minor differences among the different zones. And through this sample zone neighborhood exercise, we narrowed it down to 3 zone classes and 5 zones in the sample area. So, and those were based on, depending on what street properties laid on, like, again, according to the street classifications map that we saw on the last slide. So that helped inform the types of regulations that we developed along those streets and in these areas. Next slide, please. Okay, so, we've been working closely with the stakeholder working group. We've met with them twice now, and the sample zones really served as a first step, putting pen to paper and thinking about how we approach use, form, and intensity in the new zoning bylaw. However, there are gaps, and there is more digging needed. So some of the things that we heard were, defining key terms, clarifying definitions. Some of these terms were average building depth, height, lot. So, the current zoning bylaw defines these a certain way. However, we also have to re-examine these in the context of the London Plan. and also ensure that there is a plain language approach applied to these definitions. So that's something that we're working very closely with Scribe to ensure happens for the first draft. And we also heard that, we need to provide for flexibility in the neighborhoods. And perhaps that a way that we can explore this further is through modeling. So we're using GIS and mapping as a tool to conduct, again, what's on the site today, or what's on the ground today, and also what could be envisioned for the future based on some 3D modeling. So stay tuned for that in the new year. And finally, overlays. So this would serve as a layer on the zoning map, and could identify things like, where there is a heritage conservation district, for instance, or things like where, high density residential is permitted. So that is another thing that we are exploring as we move forward in developing the first draft. The final slide to this section, sort of wrapping things up and taking a pulse check of where we are. So we are reviewing all of the policies in the London plan that relate both to place types and ones that do not. It also provides us an opportunity to revisit the sample zones and make modifications as needed. And along the way, we're of course identifying new zoning challenges and, for instance, constraints where current conditions might not meet the intent of the London plan. And, some of the things that we're doing to work through those challenges are we're meeting with staff on a weekly basis. We've conducted a development trends analysis that looks at committee of adjustment decisions and sort of understanding, where variances are occurring throughout the city or are being requested. And additional research. So our research doesn't stop at the discussion paper stage. It continues on. As mentioned previously, modeling and mapping. So really determining where those zone boundaries will lie is a key undertaking, and ensuring that the definitions that we produce or that we develop are precise and clear, and really apply that plain language approach. And of course, hearing back from all of you and making sure that you're kept in the loop on our process. That's the last point that I'll now hand it off to Alex to finish up, or maybe Liz.
Thanks, Mishi, and thanks, David, and thanks, Alex, for that helpful presentation. I'm sure people still have questions about some of the terms. I saw a couple notes in the Q&A just to suggest that the team puts a glossary on the project website. So that's definitely an idea. So just a reminder on how to get involved in the future beyond tonight. As you learned where the team is at in terms of the work that they have done and the work that is to come and that's ahead. So after tonight, the team is going to start working away at the first draft of the zoning bylaw. In terms of engagement, there will be some online opportunities to participate, more community information meetings, more pop-up booth events, and of course, one-on-one meetings. So you will hear from us again because this is not the last time you will see us. So Alexander, thank you for posting that there's more information. We can also post the comment form that we have for the meeting tonight in case you have more questions that come up, and that will be open until January 3rd. As well, a recording of this presentation will be made available to you in case you want more information. But essentially, this is the first time you're hearing all of this, so we understand you may have many questions, and we look forward to much more participation with you as the team works on the first draft of the new zoning bylaw. So that will be in the first half of 2023. There will be additional opportunities to meet, share, and discuss the first draft. So you will start to see some of that detail. Maybe some of you were hoping to see tonight, but now you know it's a little bit further in the future, in the first half of 2023. We do want to make sure that you keep in the loop. If you haven't already, please sign up for project updates on the website, and Alex will post it again. And we'll post the meeting comment form as well